Malo Dalova. My name is Giovanni Lolohea, and welcome to the Thought Plantation podcast, the show where we harvest perspectives through conversation. If this is the first time listening to the podcast, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for all the updates and announcements for episodes and guests. Now, without further ado, let's start the show. Three, two, one, and welcome back to another episode of the Thought Plantation podcast. I'm your host, Gio, and today I'm joined by a Green Party member and running for the current MP for Manurewa. Is that correct?
That's
Lourdes Vano. Thank you very much for joining me on the episode today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Now, I was recently watching the debates, the Pacifica debates about Pacifica issues quite recently, and I was very struck to find, someone so young as yourself, and I know you're probably tired of hearing everyone say, oh my goodness, you're so young, what are you doing in politics? But still, compared to the people who were there, So if you don't mind just briefly just talking about sort of where you grew up and how you got to find yourself here debating amongst these seasoned politicians.
Yeah. Well, I never really intended to get into politics, and I'm still pretty 50-50 on it, to be honest, because as we all know, politics is quite not the best. But I think everything was sort of nudging me towards it unconsciously in a way, by the way that me and my family interacted with our housing system, with our healthcare system, with our education system for sure. And I always... Well, in Pacifica and Māori culture, it's like you've got to respect your elders. But through high school, I definitely challenged that a little bit, especially with our senior management, because they wouldn't let us do things like go to the climate strike, go to Polyfest. And so I was constantly kicking up a fuss at school. And I think at the time I didn't realise it, but as we came closer to this election, I finished high school last year. So I thought, well, I'm turning 18 next year, might as well just give it a go, and it's basically how we got here.
So you kind of winged it almost.
Yeah, and
okay.
I still am. Yeah.
So what's the process with that? So obviously there's a criteria for people to get into politics here in New Zealand. So what was the process for you? Did you have to talk to someone? Did you have to reach out to a certain person to sort of get engaged in politics? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get involved with School Strike for Climate and 40K and the Pacific Climate Warriors, who are all really awesome groups. And through that, I met Chloe Swarbrick. And through her, I reached out. I was like, hey, I'm considering running next year. And she was like, do you want to meet up for coffee tomorrow? And now here we are. So she explained the process to me. I got interviewed by two elder members of the party. They recommended to our CISPEC committee. I don't actually remember what it stands for, but they're the ones who make all the decisions about the campaign. So they approved me, and then I asked, well, you go and pitch yourself to the South Auckland branch. And you're like, I really want to stand in Manurewa because of this, this, and this. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, you get submitted to the Electoral Commission, and now you're a candidate. It's pretty easy, to be honest.
Okay. It doesn't sound that easy, but I guess it kind of worked out in a way for you, right? So there obviously needs to be a big drive for someone to go into politics, right? I mean, I'm fairly up to date with politics. I've most recently just started getting into it this year, basically. And I like to sort of classify myself as your average person who sort of kind of knows politics, but, you ask me any in-depth questions, you probably come out as a blank, right? So when you sort of, I guess you kind of mentioned it earlier, you sort of noticed a couple of things with housing, and, I'm guessing education, all to do with access and things like that. What in particular was sort of happening for you at that time, which kind of led you down this pathway to sort of throw your head in the ring, shall we say?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to my involvement with climate activism. I was noticing a lot of how we functioned and a lot of how we worked was inherently quite colonial. And then I started noticing a lot of that in Parliament. And then when we were asking politicians, we were like, hey, this is really, really important. We need to do something about this because our Pacifica nations, who New Zealand has wronged time and time again, they are doing everything that they can. Like Tokoloa is 100% solar powered, but they are still on the front lines of climate change. And New Zealand has to do something. We're a supposed first world nation, but we're still doing the bare minimum that we can. And the politicians were like, oh, we're throwing money towards this. Oh, we've looked into this. Oh, we're starting this conversation. I was like, sure, like, where is the political will for this? Where is the urgency? And then I noticed that, well, sort of always knew, but then you notice that there's a lot of Pacifica people who aren't leading these discussions. It's mainly Balangi Pakeha. And so I was like, that needs to change. And then I started noticing how intersectional climate change is with so many of our other issues, like what will happen to housing, to our so-called economy, to all of these different sectors of our lives will inherently be affected by climate change. It's like an umbrella, like racism, like colonialism is. And to see that not being talked about in Parliament really frustrated me. It still does. So I knew that I would probably never get in, and I might never get in, but to see yourself reflected in politics is really important, and that's what encouraged me to stand up. And hopefully by me standing up, that'll encourage the next person to sort of take my spot, so I don't have to do it anymore. But
so it's trying to inspire almost like a generation of people who are interested in getting into these kinds of fields.
Hopefully.
Why? I guess the question that comes to mind for me, as your sort of average person, is why isn't these conversations being had in politics?
Well, there's a lot behind that, I think. It's a hard conversation to have. It's a lot easier to just think of yourself as an individual rather than a collective, and we're taught to think as an individual, like you've got to be different, you're special, and like while those things are true, how we have to treat these problems is with a collective mindset, as to how can we help as many people as possible, not just the few. And there's this weird rhetoric about like the narrative that everyone can be a billionaire one day, you just have to work hard. And then when you're confronted with the idea that there are things that will hold people back systemically, people reject it immediately. So talking about these things are really hard and new concepts for a lot of people because they've never had to think in that way before, compared to Indigenous people who are constantly thinking of how do I look after my whānau? How do I look after this community in the best way possible? So I think that sort of mindset needs to start changing, and that's when those conversations will be more common.
Yeah, I guess for myself personally, I do highly hold being an individual as a quite a significant importance. But I hear what you're saying in terms of big issues like climate change. It does need to be a collective sort of discussion being had. Because like anything else, you know, as much as, you know, I believe that being an individual is important, but that would only impact you as a single person, right? So with these sort of big issues like climate change, you know, and it's something that I'm also concerned about because it's something that's very real. I grew up in Tonga. You know, as anecdotal as it is, I felt the climate getting hotter every year. And you only have to look at our last winter, probably one of the warmest winters we've had so far. That's not a usual or normal thing to be had, right? So I guess some of the things that I always sort of think about or try and sort of wrestle with is, do you think it's too late? You know, when it comes to climate change and things like that, do you think we're sort of at that tipping point where regardless of what we do now, it's kind of too late and climate change is already happening? It is already happening, right? Well, I mean, what's the current conversations within the especially like the Pacific Climate Warriors? You know, what's the conversation going along there along those lines?
I mean, I think thinking like that can be quite dangerous sometimes. I know it can get really, really heavy sometimes, especially this year with all of the science being thrown at us and all these different movements coming to a peak nearly. It's been really heavy on the conscience for a lot of people. But I'd like to think that it's not too late. That might be naive of me, but I feel like if there's enough political will and if there's enough urgency being felt by our politicians, that it's not too late. But obviously climate change has been here for years. Like there are increased amounts of cyclones going around the Cook Islands. There's changes in agriculture because of the changes in weather. The sea levels are like literally rising to people's doorsteps, into people's homes, and it is getting hotter. So it's here, and in that sense, yes, it's too late, but it's not too late to stop it from getting any further. I think we've got 7 or 10 years. That number keeps changing, but I think it's around 10 to do something.
And that's a bit scary, though, isn't it? Like 10 years in the grand scheme of things is a very short span of time.
Yeah.
I think one of the things is I do think we need to be changing things now. There's no way around it, I think, you know? I think maybe some of the things that is probably missed either by the media, what's portrayed out there for climate change is that we also need to find ways to adapt to sort of the new things that are happening now.
Yeah.
Like you said, the weather's already changing, the cyclones, all these things. The rising sea levels is a very concerning one, and there's not a lot of talk that I can see that's sort of happening around how are we adapting these things. I'm sure it's happening in the climate change community, but for climate change to be overly effective or to be more effective, you need the average person involved in it, and that's where it comes down to the collective coming in and sort of supporting. So what kind of stuff is being put in place now? I mean, there's obviously heaps of advertising, there's heaps of people talking about climate change. Is there sort of policies at the moment being suggested now? I know Greens will have a few, obviously, but what are the kind of the big ones do you think that's going to come through, especially during this election cycle?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge the zero carbon bill that went through last year and how good it could have been, but how average it was. But moving on from that, there are things like, I don't think many people would, this would be the first one to come to mind, but the Poverty Action Plan, because I think it's really important to acknowledge that social problems and environmental problems are very interconnected, and that's why the Poverty Action Plan is one of the biggest ones for me, because it talks about giving people that choice where you don't have to choose between rent and then buying food, or rent and buying nappies or school fees or whatever. And once you've got that choice out of the way, they can buy more sustainably. They can make those choices, like things like free public transport. Obviously, I don't think the Greens went, because we just had our announcement last week, I think, where it's cheaper for people to travel. But I think we should have just gone all the way and made it free. Just to remove that stress from people's minds, improve how public transport works, because it's a bit rubbish at the moment.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah, exactly. But once we got that on board, then people don't have to worry about I can't take up that job in town. I live out south. It's going to take too long for me. How am I going to drop the kids off at school? How am I going to get groceries? Blah, blah, blah. So having that taken care of and removing those stresses for people will let them make those more sustainable choices, and also removing the fact that it needs to be a sustainable choice and making the sustainable choice just what happens anyway. Things like free public transport, accessible community gardens, things that address both environmental and social problems are probably one of the biggest things for me.
That's cool. With the Poverty Action Plan, do you mind just speaking a little bit more about that? Just because I think there's a lot of people out there like myself who've heard things like this, who've heard these plans and heard these action plans and things like that from multiple political parties. But I guess because you're here, I don't know if I can say you're here representing the Greens, but you are you are running for them at the moment, right? So I guess it would be fair enough to say that you are. Can you mind just explaining a little bit more about what that actually entails, and what does that look like on the ground floor in the community?
So I think the three main points would be a guaranteed minimum income of $325 a week if you're a student or if you're unemployed. So maybe if you're getting $125 a week, we top you up that extra until you're meeting the $325, so that everyone's got enough to sort of live with dignity. I think it should have been a little bit more. I think I always am. But I think that's one of the most important things, especially for students. I know how expensive rent is getting, how expensive just living is getting in Auckland especially. So improving that for them would be really nice. And then taxing the rich a lot more, because obviously we believe that everyone should get what they earn. That's just a given. But there is a line where money starts making money, and what our tax plan does is identify that line and then move all the money from above that line back to the people who need it. We know because of COVID that people were pushed into corners they couldn't work out of, and they should have access to the help when they need it, not just when there's political will to do it. So that what that does is a 1% levy, so you'd get taxed 1% more for the money you make over $1 million, and then 2% more over the money you make over $2 million. So it's only the top 6% of the country, the richest of the rich. And then the third point is reforming ACC a little bit to include people with disabilities, include people with mental health, just to make it more accessible and really help people and not charge people just because they needed a cast for their arm, stuff like that. Yeah. My background is I work as a nurse for mental health, so that's my background. So I know exactly what you mean, and I hear you 100% about accessibility, right? I think with accessibility, no, let me rephrase that. So why do you think it's so difficult for people to access healthcare, schoolings, and everything? Are there sort of these
unseen barriers or unspoken about barriers that keep people out?
100%, especially in New Zealand, there are things like generational trauma, things being held back over the years, and now it's affecting our kids. Racial profiling is all over the place, especially in our healthcare system. People not knowing the language, people not understanding English or understanding it comprehensively. Again, not their fault. We need ESOL to be more accessible for people and not just in our main city centres. There are so many things that keep people out. They need time to go and get appointments. They need education on what our medication and everything here in New Zealand actually is. And they need transport to be able to get there, a lot of which is inaccessible to people. They need to be able to drive, or they need to be able to go and top up their hop card and hop on the train. Stuff like that keeps them from accessing a lot of those things. And also, if a family member is sick, I know there are so many people who would just give up whatever they needed to do to go and look after them. And again, that's the fault of the healthcare system and needing to address that more publicly to look after more and more people so that you never have to really make that choice. And we sort of saw that with a lot of South Auckland students needing to drop out to look after their families. Even if no one was sick, you still need money to live.
Exactly. I mean, you don't have to be sick to sort of be struggling with income and poverty, because it wasn't really people getting sick that was the issue, was it? It was people losing jobs and being laid off and sort of all these issues. Mind you, there was issues way before COVID happened, so this just sort of exacerbated whatever was sort of underlying. So it is unfortunate that, students had to leave school, because I'm a big person for education. I do believe education is going to be the key moving forward. And if you're at the beginning, you've had to drop out and you lose that opportunity to have it. It's unfortunate. So I guess with that, right, with the schooling at the moment, right, there's been sort of, looking over at the past couple of governments, there's been always talk about schools. Teachers are always up in arms that they don't have enough resources. They don't have enough money, comparatively to like other countries. Yeah. And forever their workloads are increasing. We've got an increasing population. More students are going to need schools and things like that. Yeah. What is there any sort of plans that Greens are putting forth to help manage the education system a lot more effectively?
I think what it really comes back down to, is again things like the Poverty Action Plan and getting people to first of all have access to education, and then improving our education system. I know we've got a lot of things about actually teaching civics education, actually teaching New Zealand history from an Indigenous perspective, especially because I think it's really important. When I learn about things like the Polynesian Panthers, I was taught the Dawn Raids happened, but then they realised it was a bad thing, so they stopped. So there's a lot of disinformation that is being spread, and clearing all of those things up and bringing Indigenous voices into that space and improving, because at the moment you can come from the Pacific and you can come and be qualified over there to be a teacher, but when you move to New Zealand, suddenly all of those certificates mean nothing. So getting rid of that barrier so that people will have to move back into the education system, which is incredibly racist, and then go through all of that process and then come out and then still find it really hard to get a job. Removing those barriers and having people like us on the forefront of teaching our kids instead of having Pākehā teaching it for us. I think that's one of the most important things, but I think the whole lot needs a big relook.
It's a big overhaul almost, isn't it? And it's kind of that's the common theme I hear from a lot of people is you can't just keep putting band-aids upon band-aids to sort of fix all these leaks that are happening. It's I don't know how viable it is to just, we're starting from scratch, guys, we're crushing everything and we're starting it new. I don't know how viable that is or how affordable that will be for the government, but it is something that is important to point out. Yeah. I do have to agree, because in no way, shape or form do we have a perfect education system, a perfect society or anything like that. And we should never consider ourselves to be, because that sort of stops you from actually wanting to get better, especially as a society. You kind of touched a little bit on just before of the education system being racist. What do you mean by that?
I think, well, first of all, there's this massive idea that being racist means you're bad and being non-racist means you're good. I think that whole binary system needs to just completely be chucked out, because a lot of what this system is built on is the fact that Pākehā know best on behalf of everybody. So inherently, a lot of what will translate into our laws, into our education, into our justice system is that Pākehā know best, and that Māori, Pasifika, they're just inherently more violent. They just need more help. They need to have Pākehā's help to get where they need to go. And I think that is really important to acknowledge. A lot of people deny that. And so once we acknowledge that, we can realize that a lot of in our education system is taught from a Pākehā perspective. Like I was just saying, the whole dawn raid situation, we all know how it actually happened, but there are a lot of people in my year group who were just taught, well, they realised it was a bad thing, so they stopped. They don't even talk about the Indigenous leadership that happened. They don't talk about the other stuff that was going on in the 80s where Indigenous people were fighting for te reo to be an official language. No one talks about that anymore. They don't talk about why Māori Language Week is really important and how it came about, why it's in that particular time. So once we start bringing that to the forefront, I think a lot of people are going to learn things very differently. There are so many things that I can recall because I just got out of high school that, I was taught in year 8, something I completely blocked out and someone had to remind me of, is we literally in social studies class made PowerPoints about why the Pacific are all third world countries. And like, you're 12. You're just going to make it. There are so many things that you learn subconsciously, and then you get out of high school and you're like, well, why would it be any different? Why would my teachers lie to me? They're all good people. So why would they be racist? Which is why we need to, again, get rid of that binary view that if you're racist, you're a bad person. Because there are good people who have a lot of racist thoughts, but they're just unaware of it.
I kind of get torn between the word racism a lot because I think to a certain degree, certain people use it often and tend to sort of paint a broad brush stroke on a lot of people that arguably are more ignorant than racist, whether they're willing to be or not. And I know the definition for racism has changed quite a bit since it first came in. Initially it was just feeling superior than another race and discriminating against them. That's obviously evolved into a more institutionalized, systemic sort of oppression sort of thing. So I do always try and be mindful for myself, right? That when someone says things about racism, I try and formulate it in my own mind. Mind you, I'm like a guy that's grown up in Tonga for most of my life and moved to New Zealand, a Western society. So I know what a big difference and a big leap it is coming from what we have and moving to a place like New Zealand. So it's a good thing because I do agree with you that a lot of things do need to be changed, especially our history.
Yes.
Our history, especially the people who write our own history, needs to be changed. We have so many amazing Pacifica historians that know our history better than a history historian, a Palangi historian who wrote something like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And also the Dawn Raid side of things. I mean, people think that the Dawn Raids was the pinnacle of the 80s fight. You look at that entire period, like there was so much racist acts happening through that entire time before the Dawn Raids. The Dawn Raids was just a significant event that happened there, but there were so many bits and pieces, which is easily brushed aside, which is unfortunate, because Pacifica people, to be honest, were the backbone to building this country during those times.
100%, yeah.
And I don't think we're acknowledged as much, and I find it very unfortunate that we end up having the worst statistics in whatever measurement people put out there, So that's sort of something that I'm sure a lot of people are starting to know, and I know that you guys are pushing that quite heavily, which is good because as much as full disclosure, I voted national last time, but that was me during a time where I looked at only an aspect of sort of thing. Yeah. At the moment, I'm undecided. So who knows? Maybe you'll convince me to vote Greens at the end. But what I always try and be is open-minded. Yeah. I don't think there's any political party that has where I agree with everything, right?
No, yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing, right? I kind of was bringing this up on another podcast. Like, if only we can pick and choose policies from each individual and put it through. But obviously, that's not going to happen. That's not our political system at the moment. So obviously, like you said, it needs a massive overhaul. Well, at the moment, there's quite a lot of powerful women in our political system. We've got Chloe Swarbrick, who I've been following for a long time. She's very, very intelligent lady,
absolutely.
Very articulate. You just can't help but listen to the things that she says, You have people like, regardless whether you agree with their politics or not, you've got people like Jacinda Ardern, you've got people like Agnes Loheni at the moment. You have all these, and the name escapes me from the Independent Party. Man, I'm so bad. I apologize for the name. Inga, do you mind just looking up who the political, because I feel really bad if I've named everyone else but them. Yeah. Just look up who the party leader is for the Independent Just look up Independent New Zealand Party, I think. God, I'm so bad. Just because I'm actually really curious to know her name. Because Independent New Zealand Party, I'm sure Google will do. Coalition, let's political party. You go to that New Zealand Independence Party Facebook. I am so hoping that the name is there.
You think it would be?
You'd think you would be, but never mind. I'm sure people can Google it themselves after. I apologize, but with all that in mind, what comes to mind is representation, right? Obviously, you have different categories for representation, but women in particular, where politics has not always been their friend, and not always been able to facilitate, especially strong Pacifica women in politics. What's that like now? Now that you've sort of decided to go down this pathway, for whatever it leads down the line, what does it feel to be in that space now? And do you think there is change happening right now?
There is change, but again, it comes back to, I think Malcolm X explained it, like, if you have stabbed me in the back and you take the knife out, are you going to ask me? Like, that whole sort of, you still were in the position where you had the knife and you still stabbed me. It's not really progress. Like, you might be pulling the knife out, or the knife might be completely out, but we're still out here bleeding. So in some ways, there is progress being made. Like, yes, I was able to stand and I was welcomed by my party, but I haven't been welcomed by politics. A lot of people have found the time to go out and find me on my social media or my email or whatever, and complain about and yell about and insult me and whatever, what so you will. And I'm luckily enough, I'm someone who's quite resilient to that sort of stuff, and I know where a lot of it is coming from. Places of people who are threatened by the fact that I'm running, who are confused by the fact that I'm running, and who are ignorant to the sort of things that I'm talking about, or haven't been taught about the things that I'm talking about. So I'm sort of all right with that, but it is like you've got a target on your back. Like, hey, I'm young and brown and I'm a woman, like, come and yell at me is sort of what it feels like sometimes. Yeah.
Social media is an unfortunate platform where people are very brave, very brave to say what they want. And to a certain degree, I don't know where you sit on sort of like freedom of speech and all that stuff, but I think there's obviously lines, right? Like, we can all agree that you're allowed to express your own opinions, but if those opinions start being threats and sort of, calling for assault and things like that, that's not freedom of speech, really. But it must be difficult, though. It must be difficult coming from, and I don't want to keep mentioning how young you are, but I think it is significant because it's actually quite inspiring about someone who's, decided straight out of school that they're going to go at it, being one of the most cutthroat, I want to say industries, but it's not really an industry, is it? Politics, but one of the most cutthroat careers, shall we say, that you can choose. So how do you deal with those people, like trolls and people who are actually not really keen to hear what you say because they have this ideology that they're not willing to give up at any point? How do you manage that? Do you ignore it for most of the part, or do you try your best to sort of engage with them? What's your strategy?
I mean, in the beginning, I would engage with them.
Can't help it.
Yeah, exactly. When it feels so easy to change their mind, and often it's not. I've gotten a lot better at noticing, like, am I actually going to change their mind, or am I just going to encourage them to comment more? Like, what do they want out of this conversation? Because there have been people who are like, I completely disagree with what you're saying about poor people needing more money and needing access to food, like blah, 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 but I'm willing to learn. You can get that sort of energy from their comment, but often I've gotten better at picking it up when they're just there to sort of like piss me off, or
of course.
Often their username will just be like Trump 2020 go national. I'll be like, okay, so you're clearly and it's often accounts with no followers, and they don't follow anyone, so they look like they've been made in the last like 3 seconds.
Those troll accounts.
Exactly. So I'm getting better at learning at picking it up when to engage.
It is a hard one, though, because that's kind of, I wish it wasn't, but I think it comes with the territory. I think regardless of who you are, you will be criticized because there's always going to be someone on the other side that obviously doesn't just disagree with you, but like every fiber of their being is saying that this person is wrong, which is an unfortunate thing, right? Because I think a lot of the reason why I started this podcast was to have open conversation, not necessarily a debate, shall I say, because I suck at debating. But what I am fairly good at, and I'm air quoting here, guys, is I'm fairly good at having a conversation, trying to sort of explore a little bit more about a person's sort of ideology and sort of how they got to where they are. Because I find that you're most likely going to find more in common than not.
Yeah.
Even if it's not policy wise, even your upbringing maybe, or even your history or your experiences, there'll be a lot of things that sort of you'd be able to sort of relate to, and I think that's where a lot of our politics fall down, is that people identify a side and they are going to die on this side regardless, right?
Yeah.
I can understand why. I mean, if ideology is like that, it's funny like that. You pick any kind of ideology, people are willing to die for it, and you kind of brought up a couple of times on your sort of Instagram where you wanted to sort of change the structure of how we do politics, So if you don't mind just touching a little bit on that, what do you think do we need to change in politics to make it maybe A, more accessible, but B, probably become more civil about it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you brought up before, the PMNRNZ Pacifica issues debate, is a really good example. I was really nervous going into it. I always am, especially in just like smaller debates. But that one was pretty big. But what I saw taking precedent, what I saw all of us putting first, is that we all had the exact same goal. It's that we all want to help our whānau. We all just had very different ways of achieving that goal. And that's what needs to be acknowledged. No one was attacking each other personally, which is often what happens in politics, especially in our leaders' debates. Which is disappointing, because you want these people to lead our country, but they're spending more time attacking each other instead of really the policies. And I think that sort of mindset, again, is what needs to change. People will criticize me for not taking criticism. I'm like, no, I know this is right. I know this is best for my family. And they're like, you wouldn't make a very good politician. You need to listen to the people. And I'm like, well, I don't want to make a good politician. Like, that's the last thing I want to be, because being a politician most of these days is just being overpaid to sit down and yell at people across the room. And I think that whole sort of mindset is that's what the job is. That's what needs to change.
Yeah, my biggest criticism for politics at the moment, yes, initially will always be policies, as much as I can, I do read up. But I think you touched on it very well, is about the civility of it all.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate to see two women, who are going for the prime ministerial role. Is that even a word? Prime ministerial role, whatever. They're both trying to become prime minister, and what's lost in all that is, what are they actually going to bloody do for us?
Yeah, exactly.
They may bring up a policy, and then you have someone just argue about it, and then they'll bring up something, and it's just a back and forth. I don't see any other way that can change. I do have to acknowledge that your the debate you were on radio and said, I would highly encourage everyone to go have a look at it. It was so civil.
Yeah.
And it was very respectful. You guys ended up complimenting each other as well throughout the whole thing. It was what stood out to me was you asked a question about, who here would be a good prime minister, and obviously everyone, what you'd expect is I would be, I think I could be. Oh, they talk about their own party. But, I think someone identified Agnes as would be an interesting leader, and that's sort of what I would like to hope most political discussions would look like, right? But at this point in time, maybe you can, shine a light on it, but I don't see any other way we can do it. Like, debate seems to be the founding structure on how we choose leaders. Yeah. It is a very Western sort of way of doing politics. But I don't know any other way that we can do it, unless you guys, know a much more better way of doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to the fact that this is a Western system we're functioning in, and of course debates are the Western way to choose who becomes, who's on top. But I think we need to integrate more Indigenous practices in how we elect leaders and how we appoint people who will look after us. I think that's what's important, and even, I can't remember what the Samoan way of saying it is, but leadership through service. And I don't think, yes, I understand the need for debates because you do want to see how they handle themselves. But I feel like we can debate in very different ways, and we can see each other. Like, maybe Jacinda goes out and helps a community garden, and Judith goes out and helps I don't know, whatever Judith wants to do. And seeing that sort of
hang out
challenge.
with her Samoan husband.
Yeah, whatever she
Samoan
thinks.
things, you know? Samoan stuff,
Talofa
obviously.
things, whatever. Exactly. But seeing that sort of, in a way, that can also be a debate, seeing that sort of challenge, like, this is where I see my time being spent. Like, what would they be doing for the community if they weren't Prime Minister? Things where you can see them being people, I think is really important, because they do become figureheads. I think that I admire them for being in this space for so long. And I think it is quite hard to choose a Prime Minister. I think a lot of people will just, like, Marama Davidson is a good example, because she didn't set out to be co-leader, and people didn't think she'd be very good at it, but she's assumed that role really nicely now that she's got it. I think that might be quite similar for whoever becomes Prime Minister. It would be quite unexpected in some ways. I don't think a lot of people would have picked Jacinda beforehand, but again, she's sort of like slotted nicely into that
right
role.
person, right time.
Yeah.
Or more like right timing more than
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
than anything else.
Most of politics is just timing, to be
is
honest.
timing.
Yeah.
That's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, even before, obviously Nationals running around with party leaders dropping left, right, and center.
Yeah.
Labour before that was dropping people left, right,
Yeah.
and center. And you're right. It is a timing thing, and you kind of have to have it planned out well. Ideally, leaders should be chosen on merit. And sort
You'd
of
hope.
like, you'd hope.
Yeah.
You'd hope. And I guess you're kind of indicating that Marama Davidson is a good example of that, because she didn't pursue it, but maybe because of the work that she's been doing already in the communities through, her, whatever program she's involved in at the moment, it kind of speaks for itself, right? And I think a lot of the times that gets overlooked, because image is everything.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but that is the name of the game a lot for politics. You just have to look at those extreme politicians, like in the States, where you don't hear policies, it's a popularity contest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it is similar here. Whoever gets more airtime tends to be the more popular vote. So with you guys at the moment, I know you guys have started a campaign. I know Chloe's been in and out of Auckland doing her own stuff, doing the meet and greets and things like that. I don't see any other politicians doing meet and greets in public.
Yeah.
I'm sure if they are, they're not marketing it right. But she's such an interesting person to sort of be around and stuff. Do you sort of try and learn as much as you can with her being present? And is she
From Chloe?
Yeah, from Chloe.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine she's someone that's very keen on getting the young generation into politics. Because she's not new, but she's not like people like Agnes Loheni, I would imagine,
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, I would say that she's probably more down to earth in terms of what's happening on the ground floor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what's it like to sort of just be shadowing her from time to time and sort of just hearing her speak and things like that? What's that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it's been... I was very privileged to know who she was and get to know her as a person and meet her in person. Before, when I was explaining how I said I became a candidate, no, it actually wasn't very easy. I was just lucky enough to know the right people at the right time. Again, it's timing. But yeah, it's been absolutely amazing to see... Yes, please. To see Chloe just talk at events. I don't see her or any of the candidates all that often at the moment, just because we're all over the place.
Everyone's politicking.
Yeah, exactly. It's exhausting. But like me and Luke Wijon, the other 18-year-old in the Greens who's running.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
I follow Luke, yeah.
Yeah, we went up with her and her EA to Waitangi earlier for Waitangi Day, as controversial as it is. But we all, so it was like a really nice road trip, and we got to see like how she chucks up, like she's always writing stuff for her Instagram, chucking it up, like, and she's given us so many good tips on making sure you're taking care of yourself, when to notice yourself burning out, when to take breaks, making sure you get sleep whenever you can. And a lot of the MPs have said that to us, like if you've got a spare couple hours, just have a nap, find somewhere quiet. But it's been pretty surreal, to be honest, because she's such, I don't know if celebrity is the right word, but she's really well known among young people.
Definitely popular, maybe.
Definitely.
Maybe popular is the word. Celebrity, celebrity, you really want that title.
No, you don't. Yeah.
But popular for sure.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's been quite, just surreal to be able to be so close to someone who is doing all of that really, really hard work. And very privileged that she is passing on a lot of that knowledge and how to survive, really. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I said, she's been doing it for a while now, and I haven't seen a lot of negative press. Obviously, there's a lot of criticism, but that in terms of the politics space, as a person, she comes across as someone very, very lovely, very caring. You know, she obviously, a lot of the things that she says comes from a very caring place. You know, so I enjoy that about her. So she's really cool. Say hi to me to her. Say hi to her for me. At the moment, so let's backtrack a little bit to sort of the beginning. You're currently running for Manurewa. What kind of things are you hoping to implement in your own town or in your own district that's going to be different to sort of what's been happening so far?
Yeah, well, I think what really needs to happen is getting that community involvement. And I think what needs to change is what politics is, because it's quite isolated through lingo and language and the demographic that has currently got the hold over it. But politics is about livelihoods, it's about well-being, and that's what people need to start understanding, and that's the information that needs to be broadcasted rather than it being about the economy and about the COVID response, because while those things are important, a lot of the people in the community already care about those things, but they're not given that doorway into politics because it doesn't look like it's made for them. I didn't think it was made for me, and it isn't, to be honest. But what politics looks like is a whole lot of people yelling at each other in Wellington. And while that is the majority of what it is, that makes people feel like they can't engage. And changing that and bringing people who are already doing a lot of political work, who are in grassroots organisations, in food banks, Life Soup Kitchen, Zumba classes, like all of those things are political because you're talking to people. People are political. If you're alive, you're political. Changing that mindset and making people realize that you actually already have a stand, you already have that soapbox that you can stand on and talk about the things that you care about. You are political, because there are people who are so involved and who are so involved in the community, but they need to be given that platform. Me as a candidate, my job should be to be a megaphone and to propel. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's all right.
To propel the voices and the solutions that are already being talked about right into Parliament, because they already know what's going on and they know what they need. Things like accessibility to education is one of the biggest things, I think, coming through with the community. There are so many high schools out there. And also how the media portrays South Auckland in general, like they sensationalize it, they make it seem violent and dangerous. Unless there's a brown kid who meets the Pākehā standard, then suddenly there's a whole article about them, like they made it out, they're doing so well, like this is a good one for the Pacifica community, as if there's so many other ways to acknowledge Pacifica success. And that was another question that we were asked in the debate, which I think was a really awesome question to be asked, to be honest, and I was glad that I got it. But we need to change how we acknowledge good work and success, and how we acknowledge what the community is doing, because a lot of people completely overlook so much of what South Auckland is doing, because South Auckland is just starting to take care of itself because the government has stopped. And I think once we bring the government down, well, not down to our level, that is a horrible way to say it. Once we bring the government off its high horse, that's a better way to say it. And say, hey, we actually know what we need already. We don't need any of your silly solutions. Like, fund our community, provide our community with the skills that we need to look after ourselves, because we're already doing it. We're just incredibly under-resourced.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of my humble observations is that there seems to be a big disconnect between what the government believes is good for us and actually what is good for the community. And I think that the big disconnect that I've noticed is that the lack of engagement with our own Pacifica leaders who know the communities, you know? Why do you think that? Do you think, like, I'm not going to say I'm a big criticizer, because I think you have to kind of know in depth what you're sort of talking about to be a criticizer, but I do like to sort of question certain things. I think that's a much more better way.
Yeah.
I like to question certain things, you know, and be open to the answer of what that is. Why do you think that the government is quite keen, whoever's in party, you know, whoever's in power, whoever's in party, whoever is in power, like, why do you think that there's this sort of underlying, well, not even underlying, this overt sort of need to tell us this is what we think is going to be good for you?
Yeah.
You know, people in Wellington talking about what's going to be best for Manurewa.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Why do you think that? Do you think that's just normal politics, or do you think there is some underlying sort of, do I dare say, conspiracy for oppression? You know, racism. Do you think that plays a major part in sort of why certain policies and things that are targeted at our own people tend to be not effective or not suitable?
Yeah, well, I think obviously there's no intent for it to be racist and there's no intent for it to be oppressive, but obviously that's what's going to happen out of the way that they treat South Auckland and other areas like Porirua and smaller regions that are predominantly brown. It's a lot easier to have those quick fixes, those band-aids, those temporary whatevers, instead of actually acknowledging why these places are so underfunded, so under-resourced and so kept at the bottom, because there are so many rules that keep people at the bottom. And it is too much for the system to handle, in my opinion. It's too big of a question for people to answer. And for a lot of people, it's just easier to be apathetic. It's just easier to be ignorant. So they're just like, we'll give you all this money, but we don't know where to put it, so we're just going to put it here, sort of situation, because it's so much easier than going, okay, we need to analyze how generationally, how over years the system inherently has treated these areas, has pushed these areas down until they literally cannot get out. And we're also going to make the media sensationalize them. So we're going to do all this, but it's just easier for them to throw whatever at it and just leave it be.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you think the solution is focusing or putting more of an emphasis on local government as opposed to national, I think, do we call big government the national government?
Central
government, is it, do you think that's not going to fix everything, but do you think that would be a significant change, giving more power to local governments to make decisions for those communities? Because I know forget the voting for, the centralized government, and the poor Pacifica, the poor numbers that go along with that in terms of voting. A local government is worse, and I would say that they would probably be able to sort of have more instantaneous change, shall we say? And yet there doesn't seem to be a big emphasis on that. Why do you think there's not a lot of heavy emphasis on voting for your local body government?
Yeah, I mean, I think again it comes from political will. A lot of the people who run for local government, they aren't well funded. All of the people with the power to fund those people want their own funding for their own political campaigns the year after. But yeah, the Greens talk about it a little bit, about having, it's in our policy, but again, we don't talk about it enough, that local body needs more power, especially because like central government can sort of say whatever it wants, but it's not going to blanket apply to everybody. There needs to be more power coming from the community. And a lot of people who run for local board are people who have worked in the community for years and are now trying to look after it, but they're not given that power by central government. So yes, I absolutely believe that we need to be giving them more power, because this sort of, we'll make this rule and it'll apply everywhere sort of approach isn't working.
Obviously, yeah. I mean, I've said it before on multiple podcasts, and I'll say it again. I don't always think that the central government knows what's best for me and my family. No. And I hear you 100%, and I kind of echo what you say as well, that the local body government does need to have a little bit more power, a little bit more say into what's happening in that particular region. So jumping all the way back to South Auckland and Manurewa, with you going for that seat, is it a seat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not up to date with the lingo.
It's a seat. Yeah.
It's a seat. Okay. So what is that? Do you go into debates? Do you sort of, go into conversations with the people who all want to sort of get that seat in Manurewa? Is there any upcoming debates that's sort of scheduled in?
We are having, well, you saw Luella on the independent candidate running for Manurewa. She's actually really nice.
That's her name, Luella. Yeah, that's right.
We get along quite well, actually. And so we're setting up more of a Q&A for all of the candidates on Manurewa Spread the News, which is the main sort of Facebook group for Manurewa. And we're trying to have more things like that, where it's more of a come and ask all of us, because we're going to discuss with each other rather than argue, because we already acknowledge that we all sort of want the same goal for our people. We want to look after each other. But yeah, we're sort of trying to move away from the whole debate thing. I think the RNZ one was the biggest one. I don't think there's many more coming up for me, but we're trying to just talk to people together rather than sort of have not a united front, but sort of change how politics is looking for a lot of people, especially after Louisa Wall was sort of shoved out by the party. People finally trusted a politician because it's so much easier to trust a person than it is a concept, whatever a party is, a whole bunch of ideas. So I understand why you would trust Louisa, and it was quite upsetting to sort of have that taken away from you, and now no one really knows who the new Labour candidate is. I haven't met her yet. I'm hoping to soon. But yeah, just giving people sort of that opportunity to talk to candidates like they're people rather than show ponies, rather than someone who is just gunning for your vote. While we are doing that, we're still trying to make those personal connections, because the way that political campaigns have been working so far in South Auckland obviously is not resonating with the community, because there is not a lot of voters out there. And so people don't put money towards political campaigns because no one votes for them, and it's sort of this chicken and egg type thing. So what we're doing is trying to stop that wheel.
I mean, just if it's anything like your RNZ debate, which was 100% more palatable than any other debates that's come through so far, I think you'll be able to get your messages out, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, out more fairly. And I think that can only be better for the people, I think a lot of the time, and I think too much sometimes, I think that we all get lost in who won the argument as opposed to what are they actually arguing. So hopefully that'll be an amazing sort of opportunity for you to sort of share what you're sort of hoping to achieve, which kind of segues into my next question. What are you hoping to achieve in sort of running for this seat for Manurewa?
Well, I think it comes back to the thing that I always say is that I want people to see themselves in politics, because while it's so frustrating and while it's really hard to be in this space, I know that we need more Pasifika people, particularly our young people in this space, because just in terms of decision making, we need people of all different perspectives going in on a decision just to make one that is more equitable for more people. That just makes sense to me, and I think it makes sense to a lot of people. So bringing those voices in, making them feel like they're represented and can take that stand, I think that's the main thing I really want to do with this campaign. My goal was never to get in. I'll probably be pretty happy if I don't, just because that was never what I set out to do, and I don't think it would be all that fun, to be honest. But yeah.
You seem to be doing pretty well, though. I mean, you are, again, saying, you're 18, your first time in politics, and yet you seem to be making quite significant waves, though, to even get to that stage where you're being put forward as, as to be the person supporting not supporting the Greens, representing the Greens for the seat of Manurewa. That's a significant thing that shouldn't really be underplayed. So I think you should actually stand up and actually, take that with you, because it is a significant thing. Especially, I've got, 2 kids, which you saw them running around and being really loud. And noticeably, there's less and less inspirational Pasifika people. Plenty of Palangis out there that are politics, but that's culture, for them. But for us, it's very difficult to identify that Pasifika person that is inspirational in terms of what they do. There's plenty, obviously, but in terms of what's represented in the media, what's sort of put out there in, whatever you want to see in mainstream, it's not obvious. So seeing someone like you being able to sort of put themselves out there, kind of you saying you didn't really want to do it is kind of endearing as well, because I think if you're going to be a professional politician, you do lose a lot of that perspective about why politics is important. But also, exactly, and why you got there in the first place, So you definitely don't underplay it. I know for myself, I've got this imposter syndrome where I'm not sure what I'm doing and whether I qualify for this. But I think at some point, people, especially Pasifika people, need to sort of step out of themselves and step out of their sort of fears and sort of what have been told that we aren't good enough for this or this is not our space, and just fucking go for it. I don't think there's any significant reason now that we shouldn't attempt it. Yes, I can acknowledge all the other barriers that stop us from accessing certain things, but I think that we have plenty of people that come out through poor decile schools and poverty and things and make a significant add a significant part to New Zealand history, New Zealand culture. And I think we fail to sort of lift them up,
Yeah.
if you get what I mean, because they're rare, which is unfortunate. And I think because they're rare, even more reason we should be lifting them up, like yourself. Okay. So with that, I'm actually curious as well. And you probably already answered it, but I'd kind of just like to ask it anyway. Why the Green Party? Why particularly the New Zealand Green Party?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of always an obvious choice for me. Just coming from, I never really saw politics as something I would get into. But the Green Party, obviously, because I came from climate activism, I thought, well, that it's in the name. They should be pretty onto it. But I did do my little double check when I was deciding to run. What do all these parties stand for? National didn't have any of the policies on the website, which I just took as a sign to not even bother. Even though I was sort of entertaining the idea, to be honest, I wasn't actually ever gonna. I just wanted to check it out. Labour also didn't have everything on the website, but again, I sort of knew they didn't go far enough for me. And the Greens, I checked their charter. We've got 4 points. Every Green Party all over the world has these same 4 points, but we have a fifth. So the normal 4 points are ecological wisdom, social responsibility, non-violence, and appropriate decision-making, all things that are pretty all right with me. And then our fifth one is Te Tiriti as a founding document. I was like, all right, that's pretty telling. And then I read a lot of our policy, and it's sort of just like, oh, I do agree with that. I didn't even think of that solution, but that makes so much sense, especially with things like our immigration policy. It talks about Te Tiriti lessons at an appropriate time for new immigrants that are coming to the country, accessible te reo lessons. I was like, oh, I didn't even think of all of this stuff, but I agree with all of it. It was that sort of thing where I was just digging through it, and I was like, Te Tiriti is right there. It's there. It's there. It's all through all of it. And I was like, okay, well, this is got to be the one. And then I saw, well, obviously there are people like Chloe and Marama, who I just look up to so much and have paved the way for me. And I'm hoping to sort of join in and link in and be that person, just be that Marama for the next person. So it's just pretty given, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. The treaty is one of those things where it resonates with me quite heavily because coming through healthcare, it is one of our core documents and how we provide care.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, healthcare has been criticized for a lot of things, and a lot of them are fair. I do have to sort of defend ourselves in terms of resources and the access and stuff like that.
Of course.
But what I've noticed is that a lot of, I'm guessing you're starting to see that I notice a lot of things, maybe too many things, is that a lot of the other political parties don't mention it as much. And we've all come to, we all have this understanding in New Zealand, and the founding sort of New Zealand was based on the treaty. Why is there such a sudden shift in sort of acknowledging, the treaty and sort of implementing it into our policies and our procedures moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has come from pressure from the ground. People like Moana Jackson, who have talked about this a lot, and like the people who put together Mātaki Mai and constitutional reform, and a lot of more people are talking about it, and they are only now being given that platform to do it. With social media, I think there's a lot more discussion about it, and people literally considering like, how was this implemented in our country today? What would we need to change? Is Parliament the right medium to make that change? All these sorts of discussions, which I think have always been happening. It's just I'm not really sure what brought it on, but obviously a lot of that drive from grassroots groups, particularly Indigenous people who have been pushing for this. And especially with things like Ihumātao, people are sort of tuning into it a little bit more. It's like a radio station that no one's really been listening to, but suddenly it's just the default, and what's going on here? I think that's what sort of happened in a way, if that analogy makes sense.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, okay, good.
It makes sense, and it's going to make sense to a lot of people. And it's unfortunate, and my hope is that we don't, because I know there's political parties now pushing to just get rid of it altogether, which is crazy.
Yeah,
which is crazy, and probably why they're polling so low at the moment.
Yeah.
But it is those radical changes, and I guess when we talk about change, we also have to be careful. Being careful is not the right word. I struggle to find the correct word to use when sort of discussing these things. It's that change can be good, but we also have to be mindful what we're changing to, right? Because there are some core things which make us a country and make us unique and significant in the world. And those are the things we kind of need to remember, and acknowledge, and the treaty is only one of those things, and the treaty is really important, it is really important, especially, like I said, in healthcare and things like that. So before you came through, I was kind of scrolling through your social media, not in a weird way, research. Research. So there's a couple of things I just want to sort of touch on where you sort of written a couple of things, which piqued my interest.
Cool.
One of the things was, obviously right now in the United States, there's a big movement to defund the police. Right. So obviously you've written, a piece on it on your social media, and I was wondering, can you explore that with me a little bit? And what do you mean, and what is your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of disinformation about what the term defunding the police actually means. And a lot of people, when they say it, they mean completely different things. When I say it, I mean defund the police and refund the community, because I think right now we are asking our police to do a lot. We are asking them to deal with missing persons, missing cats, armed robberies, people's homes being broken into, mental health crises. And I think that's just way too much to be asking of one particular sector. We need to be redistributing all of that money and putting it towards things like crisis centres, places people can go if they're having those troubles, and they can be brought to a nice warm space, have a cup of tea, and be talked through with a professional, and so they can help break down some of those barriers instead of being confronted with a police officer who's got a taser or a gun or whatever. Even the presence of a police officer can raise that tension a lot for people and make them more nervous, more anxious. And I think that's just not the right way to address a lot of the problems we're asking them to address. So I don't mean to bag on our police officers. They do a lot of good work, but they're also not overcharged. I'm trying to find the right word. Overwhelmed, and they're overworked. We're asking them to do too much. And so what I mean by defunding the police is to get some of that money and put it towards things like our mental health sector, and put it towards things like our housing, because when you think about whatever we define as crime, why are people committing crime? Why are people being put in that position where they think that's what they have to do? We need to go back to the very beginning of the conversation instead of throwing more ambulances at the bottom of the cliff, or how I like to call it, more police at the crime scene. It needs to be to the root of the problem and looking after people first before we go straight to throwing money towards people being criminalized. And again, that comes back to the justice system, and it's not really a justice system, it's a criminal policing system. Like, what are we really achieving? There's not a lot of money being put towards rehabilitation. We need to be prioritizing that and looking after people rather than punishing them for committing crime.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And it's very clear. And you're right. There's a lot of different definitions to when people throw that term around.
Yes.
And I can agree with a lot of those things. I mean, I work closely with the police in my sort of like job as a mental health nurse in the community. They are definitely overwhelmed, overworked.
Absolutely.
And regardless of adding more and more money, it doesn't fix the problem where they have to try to balance what you say. These minuscule little things like I'm just going to use like the get a cat out of a tree sort of thing, and at the same time deal with potentially life-threatening stuff. West Auckland just recently had that big serious incident where unfortunately that officer was shot.
Officer Hunt.
That was just a brief glimpse into what these guys deal with on a day-to-day basis. So you don't so when you say defund the police, you don't actually mean no police.
No.
More of a say, not equal. The word, man, I'm struggling to find words about how to say what I'm trying to say. But more of like you say, a redistribution of authority. Than anything else. And you think the communities can do that more effectively?
I think so. I think when you think about what the police are meant to do, like the whole thing about safer communities together, communities, again, already know what they need to keep each other safe. They already know how to look after each other. I think that's where we need to acknowledge where a lot of that wisdom will come from, and also redefine what the police are and what they should be doing. I think needs to be reassessed rather than asking them to do absolutely everything, because that's just not the way I see us achieving safer communities together, I guess. Yeah.
That's kind of like a different view, though, isn't it? I mean, what you're talking about in terms of defund the police, a lot of, and correct me if I'm wrong, like where the Greens sit on the political spectrum, they're more left leaning.
Yeah.
like quite far left, right? Compared to sort of Labour, which is center left. Yeah. So, I mean, I know I'm generalizing, but I hear a lot of people who sit in that spectrum would rather have no police, you know? But you're kind of going against that in a certain way, to a certain degree, where you're not sort of advocating no police, but more a reconstruction or sort of like a reconstruction of what the police do, and redefining, I think is what you said, redefining what the police's role is, and sort of looking at how that could be more effective in the community. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I say redesign, like sort of, I mean, yes, what the police's role is right now is supposedly to make safer communities together. And if that means maybe we slightly change what the police do, then yes, we should be able to do that. Or maybe we come to the decision where we get rid of police completely, and we instead have like crisis teams, and we instead have people who just monitor the community, and they don't even look like the police anymore. We need those roles, but we don't necessarily need the police as they are. If we come to the decision where yes, the police need to stay, but their role is a little bit different, then sure. But I think the priority for me is to really look at mental health and really look about how we're addressing the problems and how we're cracking down on crime, because I don't think the police as it is actually doing that job.
I'll have to agree with that, actually. I do think I can't see a society where we don't have police.
Yeah, fair enough.
So that's kind of where I sit on that. But I do definitely can see a society where our police are better managed in terms of resources and their role in our society, you know? Yeah, the mental health thing is a big one, you know, especially with the difference between, you know, why people commit crimes, you know. I can't speak for the entire society and why people commit crimes. I mean, it's a very complex situation, you know, with experiences, trauma, you know, upbringing, poverty.
Yeah.
All these things come into play, which sort of leads someone down an unfortunate pathway. And the police have to, are not trained in how to manage these people.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of mental health protocols and sort of issues have been not because of the police's fault, but, you know, the lack of understanding and the lack of training has led to unfortunate deaths, you know? And I would love to see a lot more of that change and have more education around it. You know, the police officers I talk to as well, they acknowledge that too. You know, and it's frustrating for them. I think it's quite frustrating for them to sort of have someone who's suffering from a mental illness sitting in their cells. Is that the right place for them?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, it happens. You know, and it definitely happens in the line of work that I do. Mostly because there's nowhere else to put them. Yeah. Unfortunately, and that becomes a resource issue, right? That becomes a structural issue. You know, so I agree with you. I agree with you in that. I mean, I don't think I can. Well, I guess the one thing is if I don't agree with people advocating to have zero police, but I do agree with you that it definitely needs to be relooked at. You know, especially on how we do things. We should always be open to changing how we do things.
Yeah.
Mental health is a big one. You know, and I'm glad you brought up, and you kind of mentioned it on a lot of your sort of stories and stuff like that about sort of gaining more access to mental health. What do you think from a person who's now, I know you don't want to be called a politician, but I guess we can safely say you are a politician. Yeah. Sorry to insult you like that.
Just this once. Yeah.
Just this once. Okay. Okay. Damn, I've used it up already. What do you think you would like to see to make mental health more accessible, but also help manage the stigma that it has, particularly in our Pacifica communities, which is very prevalent at the moment?
Yeah, I think again it comes back to colonialism and how mental health has sort of changed over the years. Like Pacifica Indigenous people have always looked after each other. When something is wrong, we look after each other and we talk about it and we talk things through and we find a way to look after each other in the best ways possible. But I think what has happened is there's been a very colonial view, a very Pākehā-centred view of mental health and how it's treated, and that has sort of been passed on to us indirectly. And so there are, obviously there's massive stigmas around mental health and what it is to go to therapy and everything. But I think how we can change a lot of that is also encouraging a lot of Pacifica people to get into mental health. I remember when I first used Youthline, there weren't a lot of people of colour in general who were therapists who were near me they may have existed, but they're outside of my neighborhood, or I wouldn't have the time to go and visit them, things like that. So I feel like having that more accessible to people, and knowing people who have gone through similar trials to you, who have that experience of being a Pacifica person, who have that experience of being a person of colour in this country, I think is really, really significant. And I think, again, it comes back to representation and meaningful representation, where you see yourself in that space, you're like, oh, maybe it's all right for me to step forward and get this help that I need. But I think, again, the system has also pushed us to the point where we need mental health help. Obviously, there are always things that are going to be problems for people, like depression and anxiety. They aren't things that you just decide to have. They are things that like there's stuff going on in your brain that need to be addressed, and I think that's important to acknowledge. But there are a lot of things in our system that worsen those conditions, and like housing, like education, like your family situation, and things that the system can help you not mitigate, but can address to help lessen those effects so you can be healthier, especially mentally. And I think that's where we need to start acknowledging the actual causes of a lot of these problems. And again, that comes back to why a lot of people commit crime, why a lot of people are homeless, why a lot of people make bad decisions and don't work hard enough and are lazy or dropped out of school, whatever. It's just a lot easier to blame people for those little things than addressing the major problems that put them there.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. Obviously, you know.
Yeah.
I guess when you sort of look at the mental health side of things, you know, I hear what you're saying, and it makes, you know, and I agree with it in terms of, you know, you just have to look at people's sort of backgrounds to sort of see, you know, why they've sort of ended up the way that they have. And it makes total sense. I mean, if you take the ethnicity out of it, take the culture out of it and things like that, and you find out what are the common things that all these people who access, if we stick with mental health in particular, who access mental health services, it is poverty, it is poor housing, it is low socioeconomic stuffy stuff. Yeah. You know, that's very, it's very, don't use that in your,
technical.
Don't, If I can give you one word of advice for public speaking, don't use that term, stuffy stuff.
I'll keep that in mind. Yeah.
You know, but it's one of those, but those are the things that sort of are the common indicators for a lot of people, you know, and it does impact whoever you are. It doesn't set you up well for life. A lot of the time it's going to be a systemic sort of change, and that's what's needed for a lot of things. I guess what a lot of people can't agree on is what that change looks like. And I'll give you an example of something where I'm kind of really frustrated at, is that obviously Labour made that announcement with it, was it 1 point something billion for mental health or something in their budget. It was quite a significant amount. And from a person who's actually on the ground floor and has been working in mental health close to 5 years now, I don't see it. You know, I may be just a grunt that's just at the front lines doing all the work, and this money is magically doing things in the background possibly that I don't see. But I can only measure what I am doing in terms of working with the people. You know, a lot of people I work with are people in their homes, people who are struggling day to day. I work with the most underprivileged people there's in the community, you know, and you can, for whatever issues that's happening in society, I can see it, and times that by 10 for people who have a mental health diagnosis, right? So I don't know if money's definitely not the issue. I don't think money is going to fix anything, because they have thrown money at it, you know, a significant amount, and yet anecdotal, I'd grant, right? Very, very anecdotal. But I have not seen any significant changes in how we are following up these people, you know? And I feel for Pacifica and Maori sort of mental services in particular, because they're struggling even now to sort of treat the people that they sort of manage, or sort of been developed to manage. So it's unfortunate, and my hope is that in the future things will sort of change a little bit, and systemically we can sort of make a significant change to sort of create better outcomes, you know. I think we use a business model to sort of manage, you know, the DHBs, which is unfortunate. But that's kind of the system we work in at the moment, and fingers crossed people like yourself and sort of young, aspiring, even people now, you know, who are sort of pushing for that systemic change would actually at some point make that change, you know. Little changes matter, as well, you know?
Absolutely.
I don't think we can expect like, oh, mental health, we are doing away with mental health and we have developed an entire new system. I think small, consistent change needs to happen because anything like that, anything that big, you can't just sort of crunch it up as much as I'd like to. A lot of things where I just like crunch it up, throw it out, go back to the drawing board. It just wouldn't work, you know, because then we leave a lot of people vulnerable. We leave a lot of people sort of without access. So another thing, which this was an interesting one, and it kind of straight away just caught my eye. I was like, because it kind of has the word optical in it, but optical allyship.
Yeah.
A word I've never heard before until I sort of scrolled through your page. Explain that a little bit to sort of people who don't know what that is, because I think it'll apply to a lot of people, actually.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, what is optical allyship?
Of course. And I think a lot of people have seen it, but they don't have a name for it, which is I've been doing a lot of reading this year because I've had a lot of time to be doing reading during lockdown. And then optical allyship came up. And I think a good example is on Instagram when everything was happening in the States, and there's still a lot of things going on in the States. People would post a black square to sort of virtue signal in a way like, hey, I stand with the black people, like I'm about it. Which, yes, I understand, but there are much better ways to do that and to show people that you do. Even you don't necessarily actually need to show people that you do. You just need to do the work. Because what those black squares did, a lot of people would use the Black Lives Matter hashtag. And what that did was block up that hashtag that people used to stay updated with the riots, to make sure their mates were safe, to make sure when the curfew was, things like that. So it was just damaging more so than it actually helped people. And I think one of the most ironic things that happened is we had my group For the People. We had a empowerment festival in CBD where we brought Indigenous people from all over the world, from Africa, from Asia, from Pacifica, from New Zealand, and we let them sell or promote whatever they wanted to. And we asked Glassons, who posted a black square, if they would let us promote this event. And they were like, no, we can't do anything. And one of my mates in the group were like, but you posted a black square. This is a way you can actually help this community. And they're like, sorry, we can't.
Something tangible, right?
Exactly. So I think people have definitely seen it, and people have seen each other posting things on their stories, like putting things on Facebook, when they're actually not doing that work. Like, yes, they'll be like, yeah, let's get rid of the police, but they're not going to look at any of the other systemic issues with our education system, with the rest of our justice system, with healthcare. A lot of people are happy to preach all of that stuff, but not do any of the work. So that's what optical allyship is.
So bullshitting people.
Yes.
Basically. In a nutshell. Don't use that word as well in your public speaking. Yeah. But it's such a controversial topic, though, isn't it? Because I know a lot of the times it's coming from a good place. People want to sort of look like they're helping. But at the same time, me and my wife had an argument about this, the awareness campaigns. Now, I'm not too big on the big awareness campaigns, especially the mental health ones, because I don't think we need just 1 month to create awareness. And to be fair, for me, be free to sort of disagree. I don't think awareness changes anything. Yeah. I don't think awareness has anything tangible that is helpful for the people that you're trying to create awareness from. Now, if you're going to mix awareness with action, those are two different things. I think they work quite well in tandem together. But if you're posting up stuff just like awareness, like, I'm just going to throw out some statistics out there and you should do something about it. And that's what gets me. It's a person who, and obviously generalizing here, but when I see these things, it's like they're telling me you should do something. I've already done my bit, which is post a black square or, copy and paste a post or something like that. And it infuriates me a little bit, maybe a lot, probably a little bit more than a little bit. Yeah. But, because it's disingenuous, and I've hit up a couple of like my mates about it. I think the biggest one was the push-up challenge. I know people doing it for good reasons, and I acknowledge the good reasons. Suicide is a very serious thing in New Zealand. We have the worst statistics for the country that we are. Like, it's ridiculous, right? But then you have people do the push-up challenge, and that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change anything. Yeah. If anything, it can have negative repercussions by sort of showing people that. It's reminded constantly that other people are sort of, You know, people don't want pity.
No.
You know what I mean? I think at the end of the day, if my experience counts for anything, you know, working with people with depression, but not just depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, you know, personality issues and stuff like that, is none of them want pity, you know? And that's all I see with these kind of awareness campaigns.
Yeah.
So when I saw this, I was like, man, this word needs to be on a t-shirt, and I'm going to give it to every single person that sort of posts up stuff that I know they're not doing jack shit for.
Yeah.
Now, I want to acknowledge that people are empathetic. You know, as humans, we are empathetic to the struggles of other people. But, and I kind of don't want to be a gatekeeper as well, where I'm saying, you know, why post up something, you know, because awareness, yes, can be helpful. But I also want people to realize that in itself doesn't really do shit.
Yeah.
You know, so, and me and my wife had an argument about this, and she's like, no, awareness is important. And I kind of have to let my wife win, otherwise I'll be sleeping outside. But my point is that if we are doing a challenge, and first off, I hate challenges as well.
Yeah.
I'm tired of challenges. If we were to do a challenge, wouldn't you want something more, I say the word again, tangible?
Sign this petition challenge type stuff. Yeah.
Or volunteer an hour of your week, or do, you know, even stuff that you can do for your own family, you know, reach out to a family member, you know, do something, especially during COVID, during these times where loneliness is a significant thing. I think about elderly. I think of people who are, you know, suffering depression stuff prior to COVID would have been exacerbated. I know it got exacerbated, you know, during this COVID time. You know, that to me would be, that's a challenge I can get behind. You know, I would sort of, you know, get off my high horse with the challenge stuff and sort of say, I'll engage.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of what our society has kind of turned into. It's kind of like, you know, pat each other on the back. We did something, you know, like, look at me. But that's also the selfishness of our society at the moment, too. It's like they want to be seen to be doing something, but not doing anything, you know. And that's a harsh thing to say, you know. You can hit me up anyway. I'll tell you straight to your face, too. But, you know, it's unfortunate thing that I'm hoping as, you know, time progresses and people start to understand these issues a little bit more in depthly, like I'm starting to learn more and more, is that we need to be actively doing something, even if it's something small. Like an hour out of your week is not long. People spend 3 hours on Instagram, for example, not to name names, but I'm definitely not one of those people. But, you know, just there's plenty of things you can do, you know? So that is a very, that rang home for me a lot, because just of my observations, and I've never been the person to sort of just copy and paste something. Like you see everyone doing it like a populist sort of thing. Yeah. Because I think it's stupid. Yeah. You know? I think if you want to be seen, well, in my books, if you want to be seen as someone doing something significant, and for me to give you a pat on the back is fucking doing something significant. Yeah, exactly. You know? So, with all that, I guess we cannot end this podcast without you talking a little bit about the upcoming referendum, which is the cannabis referendum, and how that's going to look like in New Zealand society. It's quite a buzz at the moment, the referendum, which I can understand why, you know. So I've obviously heard Chloe talk about heaps, and she's been on other shows and debating other people, even back in like 2019. Yeah. You know, so for you guys, and I guess for you who's actually working with the party, what is the sort of motivation to sort of push this? Because it's not medicinal cannabis. And I guess people sort of mistake that, because medicinal cannabis is legal, shall we say. Not accessible. Definitely not accessible. No. You know, but this is recreational use for cannabis. Why does New Zealand need recreational cannabis?
Yes, I think that's not really the question here. I think for me, the reason I'm voting yes is because there are so many male and male passing brown boys who are persecuted, because Pacifica and Māori are more likely to be targeted by the police, more likely to be convicted, charged worse, charged with a life sentence, be pulled over, be tasered, have dogs set on them. There are so many statistics that are pushing us into this corner again. And there are a lot of people who have been incarcerated for the possession of marijuana. And I think that's the reason I am voting yes, so that we can stop that. It's not, marijuana to me isn't so much a gateway into worse drugs, it's a gateway into the criminal justice system, and it is so hard to get out of it once you are in it. your voting rights are taken away, you have to re-enroll. Like, why on earth would I re-enroll for a society that has wronged me time and time again to the point where I was put in jail for something that should be legal? I think that's the reason I'm voting yes. I know there's a lot of talk about whether or not recreational use should actually be something that we even look at, but what that also does, it makes it safer for people, so that the pharmacist can be like, hey, you've actually bought a lot this week. Can I recommend you do something else? Can I lessen this for you? Do you need to chat to someone? So there's that sort of, I don't know if middleman is the right word, but there's someone to sort of be like...
Regulation, almost.
Yeah, exactly, regulation. It's making it safer for people, something that is already happening, but it looks after people as well as has a more just approach to how we deal with people who have it.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate slightly.
Sure.
I am pro-cannabis, so I am voting yes on the cannabis referendum. But I had a gentleman, I don't know if you know the name, Ranjit Danielu.
I don't think
He's a gentleman that, I'm not going to say who he works because he doesn't represent them when he talks about this, but he's quite an advocate. He doesn't, what there's pro-cannabis, and what's the other side of it? Not nay cannabis? Yeah. So he's voting basically no, and he's a community speaker. He works with the community. He has sort of dealings with drug and alcohol and stuff like that. And I had him on the podcast, and he sort of talked about why he's voting no. So just going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. You talked about the criminalization of people with cannabis and stuff like that. The point he brought out, which was a surprise to me, and I haven't fact checked this, but he's a genuine guy and he's very nice, so I'm not going to question him too much. So the prosecutions and jailing of Pacifica people for cannabis has decreased significantly over the last 3 years, to the point where I think in 2019 there was only 2 people who went to jail for cannabis possession, and prior to that was the year before that was 7, and these people had prior convictions that wasn't related to cannabis. So when I hear and trust me when I hear what you guys are saying in terms of decriminalization and sort of helping that aspect, with statistics like this, can we say that legalizing cannabis for the sake of keeping brown people, Pacifica people, and Maori people out of jail is a good enough reason? Because if we go by these statistics, and mind you, take us with a pinch of salt, yeah? Do you think that still justifies legalizing cannabis?
I think so, because it's not only people being incarcerated, it's also it's going on their record. We've still got the 3-strike law, so they can be, if anything else happens, they can be thrown into jail for life. So there are other things that happen within the justice system that they can be convicted for. Maybe they don't go to jail, but maybe they have to pay a fine or things like that. That I think we need to guard them from. Not necessarily always going to jail, but yes, definitely that is something we can do. But I haven't heard those statistics before.
Neither have I until you brought it up.
I don't know if I'll call it fact checking, but I'll definitely want to learn more about that if that is true.
It's an interesting one, and almost very compelling in terms of like a counter argument to
Absolutely,
that.
Yeah.
I think, for me myself, that I'd like to think I'm more centered to a lot of policies. Like there's stuff that's conservative that I agree with, stuff that's on the left side, I'm more left leaning that I agree with. But I think a big part of my makeup is more libertarian almost, right? So I'm about freedom. So that's my reason. That's my reason for the cannabis. I think if we have legalized alcohol and we, stuff like that, and plenty of research shows that cannabis is less harmful than alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't see why we shouldn't have that choice ourselves, right?
Exactly.
That comes with other issues, right?
Yeah.
So with alcohol, we all know the damage that it's done to our communities, the damage it's done to families and things like that. Do you think with legalizing cannabis, and forgive me if I'm sort of like, no,
it's fine.
If I'm sort of asking sort of stupid questions for one, do you think having cannabis as another legal substance available more easily available, because I know the argument for the black market and people are already using it now, which obviously makes sense. Of course they're using it now, but making it legal and having that access increased, do you think that would cause more problems having it legal?
In my opinion, it won't, because there's a lot of safeguards within the bill that would look after those sort of things, would have it regulated, would look after the community. And I think having it legalized would open up more windows for research and looking into the actual genuine effects, especially because we'll be using it a lot more broadly, and there are countries and states who are using it already, who we can call on and learn from, as well as starting to do our own research. So I think, obviously, we cannot foresee everything that will happen no matter what bill we pass. Maybe new problems will pop up. But I think with having it more accessible to people, we'll be able to learn how to address problems that do come up and already have.
That's true, and that makes a lot more sense because at the moment, I'm stepping into two worlds here.
That's fine.
Like, of course, because at the moment it's not regulated.
Yeah.
Well, so people still have access now, and I guess my hope would be that once it becomes legalized, fingers crossed, that regulation will be more tight-knit and there'll be less likely for people to go to the black market.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with Ronji, the gentleman I spoke to, I think 2 podcasts ago, where the black market won't go away. But if you look at other places that have legalized cannabis, and we'll talk about cannabis in particular, the black market had decreased to at least 30% of the market share, which is significant, which is still better than 60, 70%, sometimes 100%.
Yeah.
Actually, it would be 100% really, right? Because it's illegal here.
Yeah.
So I think we can't deny that, I think we can't deny that we need to take it out of the gangs and into the control. Now, the other issue comes into, like, is the government the right people to control this?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a new venture for New Zealand, right? We don't know what the real impacts would be until we actually implement it,
Of course.
And I do think that the people pushing for it, primarily the Greens, are well aware of that. Unfortunately, one of the things, and this is my own personal view, is that there's not a lot of emphasis on the mental health side of things, as much as I'd like it to be. And I've spoken about this before on previous podcasts where I understand that, when we're looking at legalizing something, we need to look at the country as a whole and not look at specific little groups of people. And that's kind of unfortunate in a way because some of those groups of people are the more vulnerable.
Exactly.
I think of our people in low, in poverty, but Pacifican Maori would be actually more prone to sort of more issues possibly with cannabis. But even smaller than that, mental health clients, right?
Yeah.
They make up say 5% of the population. I don't know if that number is accurate, but I'm just fucking eyeballing it. Okay,
fine. Yeah.
Sounds right to me. I don't think. I mean, I think about when synthetics were made legal.
Yeah.
And the big issues that came with that. Obviously different. I can acknowledge that, and particularly mental health. Like, oh man, we're still feeling the effects now of how detrimental and devastating synthetics were, and like I said, I've acknowledged that it's not the same. Cannabis and synthetics are very different. The way they're manufactured, the way that they're chemical compounds and the effects, but there's similarities. So my concern will be that we may see an increase, and I've got no data to back this up. This is just me thinking out loud. That there may be an increase in mental health issues leading to the future. Because there is plenty of research to show that if you're using cannabis at a very young age, that does affect your developmental progress. But I know the bill is for 20 years and up, right? But even then, the average age that's recommended that may have little or no, I'm not going to say no, but have a less chance of you developing, say, a mental health disorder is about 25 up.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Oh, I guess I know you don't speak for everyone, but for yourself, what do you think when you sort of think of the possible impacts it can have for mental health?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of it is unforeseen and we won't know until we actually do it. But I think what it comes back to is appropriate decision making in our charter, which is all about having the people most affected by the decisions, no matter how small the minority, at the front of those discussions, and having people like you who are on the front lines and having people who are clients talk about those issues and have them inform the bill and how it is enacted, because yes, whatever the bill says, it says, but how it is in practice can be completely different, which is what I think a lot of the concern is. And again, yes, I reckon that age should be higher. It should be 25, especially if that's what the science is telling us, and we should be informed by professionals when we make these bills. But again, that's appropriate decision making and bringing people right to the front. Yeah.
Because the current bill as it stands now, that's not final, is it? Is
No.
that correct? Because
Yeah.
I know
This one isn't binding.
So maybe you can educate me a little bit on this. So when we're sort of trying to enact a law, obviously you don't just write a law and then you put it up for vote. Obviously there's multiple stages it has to go through. So can you just explain to me a little bit? So with this cannabis law, cannabis bill, referendum, cannabis referendum, when, say, we get the 50% that we need, that then pushes it towards what? What's the next stage after that?
So this referendum, unlike the end of life choice bill, is not binding. So we can all vote on it, but Parliament can decide whether or not to. But in that stage where they decide whether they want to put it through, if we approve it, then they're like, okay, that is our like taste test. That is our thermometer for what the country wants. So we might act a little bit in line with what they want, right? And so that's where they can make those amendments. Like maybe people normally without a referendum, there are times for submissions where it goes to select committee. People can come forward and say, hey, I actually think this needs to be higher and I'm a professional, or hey, I think this should be lower because of my experience with blah blah blah. So that has happened before. I'm not sure exactly when. And then obviously at some point in the normal like lawmaking progress, the parties have moved it, or whoever, the House voted to move it towards a referendum. And so that's not the normal way we usually pass laws. So what that's done is it's given that opportunity to use that thermometer to be like, hey, what does the public want? Cool, this is how we're going to enact it. Maybe when we won't actually pass this bill. So what we're relying on by voting yes, be like, I'm voting yes, and that's how I tell the political leaders what I want. Even if it's really close between, because I think it's at like 45, 49 or whatever. It's quite close at the moment.
It's going to be really close to the wire.
Yeah. So there will be those, both sides will be quite strong, I think, when they come to that decision-making table, which I think is still pretty good, so that they've got a lot to consider in a more well-rounded view, which is just better for decision-making. But it's not binding, unlike the end of life. So it's a lot of it's still pretty up in the air.
You're a very reasonable person.
Thanks.
You know, like when I, which is a great thing. You know, I mean, I didn't have any expectations you coming here today,
That's good to be honest.
You have been very open about a lot of things, and I appreciate you being here. I've kept you here long enough, I think. So, thank you so much for being here today, and I think you've articulated yourself very well, and hopefully the people who are sort of wanting to know more about sort of what the Greens stand for and what you stand for in terms of trying to get the seat of Manurewa, that this will sort of help that a little bit and sort of open them up to maybe a different perspective. Yeah. So here's your opportunity to sort of throw out sort of any links or any sort of advertisements you know you'd like to sort of put out there. Your time.
Well, I think what is most important is that you find out when your local booths are open and when they're open, and where they are, because a lot of them are open at weird times, or they change every day, or they're closed on the Mondays, but they're open every other day. So go to vote.nz and figure out when those are, where they are. And go and vote. You don't even have to vote for me. Just please vote, have your voices heard, vote about what you care about, because what voting is a core half for our decision making nationally, and that's how you can show our political leaders what we care about and what we want to prioritise moving forward.
Excellent. And if people wanted to find out more about you, do you have any sort of public sort of social media stuff that people can access?
Well, I think I use my Instagram the most. I think so, just Lourdes.Vano. And you can pretty much find me on other platforms by the same link.
Same name. Yeah, so you're on Twitter as well, I see.
Twitter, Facebook, yeah.
TikTok?
TikTok, yeah. I am on TikTok by the same Lourdes.Vano, yeah.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you again for agreeing to be part of this discussion.
No problem.
And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing so far within our Pacifica communities.
Of course.
I wish you the best of luck in the upcoming elections, and definitely need to do this again at some point when you are finally, when you've got the seat for Manurewa. I have to call you something different. Do I have to say right honourable?
Right honourable, yeah. Oh, imagine.
Damn, be epic. Thank you again.
No problem.
Malo pito for listening to this episode of the Thought Plantation podcast. You can find more episodes like this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Thought Plantation Podcast. We are also on Twitter at @TPlantationPod. Malo opito homo lava mai ki he tautala noa, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.